The millionaire came home earlier than expected, and what he saw left him in shock. That afternoon, rain drizzled softly against the massive glass windows of the mansion on Willow Hill. Ethan Wallace drove home earlier than usual, a rare act for a man consumed by work. On his way, he thought only about the blueprint waiting on his desk, unaware of what awaited him behind his own front door. The automatic gate opened, and shouting erupted from inside. A crystal vase shattered across the marble floor. A middle-aged woman, the 12th nanny in 2 years, stood flushed with anger, yelling at the 3 small children racing through the living room. "That's it! I quit! I can't take another minute of this!" Ethan paused in the doorway, his face showing more exhaustion than surprise. He had grown used to this scene. His 6-year-old triplets, Lucas, Ella, and Noah, had driven out every nanny in the city. None could withstand the yelling, the chaos, or the quiet defiance in their haunted eyes. When the woman stormed out, silence swallowed the house. Ethan loosened his tie and sighed. The ticking of the clock echoed through the emptiness. He glanced around. The room was spacious, flawless, beautifully designed, and utterly lifeless. On the wall still hung Laura's portrait, his late wife. Her smile was gentle, her eyes full of light. 3 years had passed, yet every time he looked at her, his chest tightened. Since the car accident, Ethan had buried himself in work. He'd built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but couldn't rebuild the home that had collapsed inside him. A small sound pulled him back. Ella, the smallest of the 3, stood at the foot of the stairs clutching a torn teddy bear. "She's leaving too, Daddy?" Her voice trembled. Ethan knelt and nodded softly. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to, but she kept yelling at us," Ella whispered. Up the stairs, Lucas crossed his arms. "She called us demons." Noah hid behind his brother, his dark eyes deep and sad. Ethan looked at his children, the last living pieces of Laura, and felt helpless. He loved them, but didn't know how to reach them. Every time he looked into their faces, he saw hers, and grief crushed his heart all over again. "I'll find someone new," he murmured, though even he didn't believe it anymore. When the children went upstairs, Ethan walked to the tall window overlooking the backyard. The late autumn wind rippled through the willow trees, brushing the still surface of the pond. Everything looked perfect, except the emptiness gnawing at every corner of the house. He picked up his phone and called the nanny agency. "Hello, this is Ethan Wallace. I need someone again." On the other end, the agent hesitated. "Mr. Wallace, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Our staff, they all know about your children's reputation." Ethan closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. Just find someone, whatever the cost. When he hung up, he stood in the center of the room. From upstairs came the faint sound of laughter, not happy laughter, but the hollow echo of children trying to fill a mother's absence. The fading light of dusk brushed across his face. The house, though grand and magnificent, felt unbearably empty. Ethan wondered if it would ever again echo with genuine joy. Laughter not born from mischief, but from love. That night, as the sky above Willow Hill faded into slate gray, Ethan sat alone in his office. He didn't know that elsewhere in the city, a woman would soon wake to a morning that would change both of their lives. Grace Miller. The alarm rang at 5 a.m. Grace stirred from her sleep, stretching gently in the small apartment at the end of Maple Street. The room was barely 10 square meters, walls cracked and faded, yet everything was tidy and clean, On the small table sat a chipped vase holding wild daisies, a gift from her 16-year-old daughter, Lily. The scent of coffee filled the air. Lily was already up, tying her hair for school, her worn-out uniform neatly pressed. "You're up early," Grace said, her voice still husky from sleep. "I've got a math test. Wanted to review a bit." Lily smiled. Grace watched her daughter with pride tinged by sorrow. That girl was the only reason she'd kept going after life fell apart. Since her husband, Mark, died in a construction accident 5 years ago, Grace had carried the weight of everything alone, cleaning houses in the mornings, babysitting in the afternoons, and doing laundry on weekends. Life was hard, but Grace never complained. Every dollar earned carried her dignity. "Make sure you eat breakfast," she said. "I'll be home late. The company added a new cleaning job." Lily frowned slightly. "One of those big houses again?" Grace chuckled. "Yes. I heard it belongs to some famous architect. Just another house to clean." "Rich people are always messy," Lily teased. "Don't say that. Honest work is never something to be ashamed of," Grace replied gently but firmly. After Lily left, Grace sat down at the small wooden table and opened her notebook. Her book of survival. Rent, utilities, tuition, bus fare, each line carefully written. At the bottom of the page, in Lily's handwriting, were the words, "Mom, when I become a doctor, I'll buy you a beautiful house." That simple promise kept Grace moving forward whenever exhaustion tried to pull her down. She put on her worn coat, grabbed her cleaning kit, a few mops, detergents, and a box of wipes she jokingly called her weapons of motherhood. The morning air was cold, brushing pink across her cheeks. The first bus of the day was nearly empty. Grace sat in the back, watching the city wake through fogged glass. Workers hurrying, students rushing, horns in the distance. Across the street, a woman in a sharp suit entered a tall office building, a world far from hers. But Grace didn't envy her. As long as Lily could study, every sacrifice was worth it. When she reached the Willow Hill neighborhood, the guard greeted her politely. "You must be the new cleaner. I'm Joey," he said. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Joey," Grace replied. He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Mrs. Miller. The kids in that house, they're not like other kids." Grace paused. She'd cleaned many homes with children before, but never had anyone warned her like that. The mansion appeared ahead, towering, cold, its glass walls reflecting the gray sky. Inside, shards of a broken crystal vase still glimmered on the floor, a few toys scattered nearby. The silence was so heavy, she could almost hear her heartbeat. A kind voice came from the kitchen. "You must be Grace. I'm Mrs. Turner, the cook." The older woman smiled warmly. "Be gentle with the children. They're good kids, just lost too much too soon. Their father's always busy." Grace nodded. "I understand. Grief leaves a kind of dust you can't just sweep away." When Mrs. Turner turned back to her cooking, Grace's eyes caught a small photo frame on the counter. A young woman, radiant, holding 3 laughing children. Laura Wallace. Grace traced the edge of the frame lightly, then began her work. She cleaned every corner with quiet precision, every gesture careful and calm. It wasn't just a house she was cleaning. It was the residue of sadness clinging to every surface. The next morning, sunlight crept gently over Willow Hill. A thin mist wrapped around the willow trees, softening the sharp edges of the grand mansion. Grace arrived early, as always, carrying her familiar cleaning bag and her quiet composure. Mrs. Turner greeted her at the kitchen door, her warm smile unchanged. "You're early again. Mr. Wallace just left for work, and the kids. She hesitated. They're probably planning today's mischief. Grace chuckled softly, adjusting her apron. I once watched over an entire kindergarten class. Nothing can be worse than that. Let's hope you're right. The house looked brighter in the morning light, yet the air still felt heavy. The kitchen gleamed with perfection, every utensil aligned, every counter spotless, like someone was trying too hard to keep life under control. As Grace wiped the dining table, she heard faint footsteps above. Quick, then silent. Then a burst of giggles. She glanced up toward the stairs. Before she could react, a small ball rolled down and stopped at her feet. Grace bent to pick it up. It was painted with 3 childish faces. I think that belongs to my kids. The calm male voice startled her. Ethan Wallace stood by the doorway, crisp shirt, tired eyes. His gaze carried a mix of wariness and something softer. Gratitude, perhaps. Sorry, I didn't know you were still home. It's fine. You must be the new cleaner? Yes, sir. Just here to tidy up. If the children bother you, let me know. Grace smiled gently. I think all they need is a little patience. Ethan paused. It had been a long time since anyone spoke about his children with such kindness. When he left, silence returned, but not empty silence. From the second-floor railing, 3 small faces peeked down, watching. Lucas, the tousle-haired one, whispered, "She's the new one." Ella, with her 2 golden braids, said softly, "She looks nicer than the others." Noah said nothing, clutching his teddy bear tight, his dark eyes deep and sad. They observed Grace like cautious kittens. When she started mopping the living room floor, Lucas sent a toy car rolling down toward her, testing her. Grace stopped, looked at the toy, picked it up, and placed it gently on the table. No scolding, no glare, just a faint smile. She continued cleaning, humming softly, her voice floating like a warm breeze. Ella tilted her head. Is she singing? Sounds like it, Lucas murmured. Like one of those baby songs. Noah whispered, like the song Mom used to sing. That made them all fall silent. For a moment, they simply listened to that gentle, soothing voice drifting through the house, soft but full of feeling. When Grace looked up, 3 curious faces peeked down. She smiled. Good morning. I'm Miss Grace. I'm just here to make your house a little cleaner. Lucas narrowed his eyes. You're not a nanny? No, I'm just the cleaner. Then you can't go in our room. Grace nodded calmly. I'll only clean the hallway. I won't touch your things. Ella asked, Do you have kids? Yes, a daughter named Lily. She's twice your age. Noah whispered, Do you yell at her when she does something wrong? Grace paused, her eyes kind. No, I ask her why she did it. The answer made them glance at each other. Lucas crossed his arms. You don't know what you're talking about. Grown-ups always yell when we mess up. Grace smiled. Maybe they're just scared. People yell when they're scared. It makes them feel stronger. The children went quiet, as if trying to understand. All morning, Grace worked silently, yet she could feel their eyes following her. When she sang, Ella would appear at the stairs pretending to look for a toy, and Lucas would wander by, asking questions that didn't really need answers. From the kitchen, Mrs. Turner watched with a knowing smile. You've caught their attention, she said. Grace replied softly, They don't need control. They just need to be heard. By late afternoon, as Grace was packing up, soft footsteps ran behind her. Ella held the small ball from earlier. You forgot this. Grace took it and smiled. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll leave it on the shelf. Noah said you sing pretty, Ella whispered, blushing before running off. Grace stood still for a long moment, her smile gentle, tinged with melancholy, as if some forgotten memory had stirred inside her. She didn't know that, within this cold mansion, 3 children and 1 lonely father had just cracked open the first door to warmth and light. Late afternoon. The sun spilled a pale orange glow across the glass walls, softening the cold edges of the Wallace mansion. Grace stayed a little longer that day, finishing her last task, cleaning the upstairs hallway where the children's rooms were. Mrs. Turner had left early, and the house was hushed. The silence was alive, filled with faint sounds, footsteps on the wooden floor, the whisper of wind through the willows, and quiet murmurs behind a closed door. Grace set down her bucket and began wiping the banister when she heard arguing. "That's mine!" Ella's voice, high and emotional. "No, it's mine!" Lucas snapped. A crash followed, then silence. Grace knocked softly. "Is everything okay?" 3 small faces turned toward her. The room was a mess. Toys scattered, books toppled, a broken toy car in the middle of the floor. Ella's eyes were red. Lucas stood defiant, and Noah hid in the corner clutching his teddy bear. "You can't come in!" Lucas shouted. Grace stopped at the doorway. "All right, I won't, but it seems that poor car needs rescuing." She knelt by the door, picked up the toy gently, and turned the loose wheel. "A bit of glue and patience. It'll be good as new." Lucas frowned. "You don't get it. Mom bought that for me." His voice cracked slightly. Grace met his gaze with quiet kindness. "That's why it matters so much to you." He said nothing, looking away. Grace placed the toy back down. Sometimes when we're scared of losing something, we break it first, so it doesn't get the chance to leave us. The room fell still. Ella stroked her doll's hair softly. "Mom used to say toys have feelings. If we take care of them, they stay with us longer." Noah looked up. "Do you believe that?" Grace smiled. "I do. Just like I believe that the people we love never really go away. They just stay in a different way." The words hung in the air, warm and fragile. The setting sun painted their young faces with soft gold. 3 children sharing the same quiet ache. "Can you tell us a story?" Ella whispered. "What kind of story?" "A happy one, but no one dies." Grace chuckled. "All right. Let's see. How about the little bird who forgot how to fly?" They gathered around her, sitting on the floor as she began. "Once, there was a tiny bird who lost its mother in a storm. Every day, it watched the sky but was too afraid to try. Until one day, a little girl came along, rebuilt its broken nest and said, 'Just open your wings, and you'll see you can.' The bird flew, not high, not far, but free for the first time." Ella looked up. "And the girl?" "She stayed on the ground," Grace said softly, watching and smiling. Silence filled the room, tender and full. Lucas, pretending to be indifferent, watched Grace with new eyes, less wary, more curious. "Do you know more stories like that?" Noah asked quietly. "Plenty. But each story only comes after someone promises not to break toys anymore." They laughed, the kind of laughter the house hadn't heard in years. Grace stood, gathering her things. At the doorway, she turned back. "I'll be cleaning this hallway tomorrow. You can help me if you'd like." Ella nodded eagerly. Lucas looked away but couldn't hide the spark in his eyes. And Noah whispered, "Can you sing the bird's song?" Grace smiled. "Of course." As she walked away, her soft voice began to rise. a lullaby carried by the fading light. The children sat silently, listening until it disappeared down the hall. For the first time in years, they weren't afraid of the dark. That evening, after singing the song about the little bird, Grace left the mansion in the soft twilight. The laughter of the children still echoed faintly behind her, a fragile sound, like a breath of warmth in a house long frozen. But that fragile peace wouldn't last for long. The next morning, when Grace returned to the Wallace mansion, the air felt different, colder, tighter. The gentle light of the previous day was gone. As she stepped inside, the sharp click of heels echoed down the hallway, steady, commanding, almost militaristic. In the living room stood Veronica Dean, speaking with Ethan Wallace. She was tall, perfectly poised, her hair pulled back, her black shoes polished to a mirror shine. Her face was smooth, stern, and completely emotionless, like someone carved her from ice. "This is Miss Veronica Dean," Ethan said. "She has years of experience managing children." "A pleasure, Mr. Wallace," Veronica replied crisply. She turned to Grace, her gaze cold, assessing. "You're the cleaner?" "Yes, ma'am," Grace said softly. "I trust we understand our boundaries then." Ethan didn't sense the tension. He smiled faintly and left for work. The moment the door closed, Veronica's voice began to fill the house. "Lucas, straighten your back. Ella, no talking while eating. Noah, look at me when I speak." Her tone was clipped, mechanical, like she was running a military drill, not a breakfast table. The children obeyed in silence. Their faces were blank, their movements stiff. As Grace passed the dining room, her heart clenched. Ella's spoon trembled in her hand. Noah blinked fast to hold back tears. Lucas's lips were pressed into a hard line. By afternoon, the house had turned unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, but suffocating. Then, a sharp cry broke the stillness. Ella's voice. Grace hurried upstairs. The door to the kids' room was half open. Inside, Ella sat on the floor, her doll broken in half. Veronica stood over her, holding a piece of it like evidence. "This is what happens when you disobey," she said. "Children must learn control." "She's just a little girl," Grace said quietly. "Not your concern," Veronica snapped. "Stay out of it if you value your job." Grace said nothing. She knelt beside Ella, touching her shoulder gently. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'll help you fix it." Veronica's voice sliced the air. "No, she needs to understand consequences." Grace bit her lip, her chest tight with restrained anger. She forced herself to step back. That evening, when Ethan came home, Veronica was waiting with her notebook in hand. "The children are making progress," she reported smoothly. "I've set a strict routine. Meals, lessons, bedtime. Structure is key." Ethan, exhausted, nodded absent-mindedly. He didn't see Noah's shadow behind the stairs, trembling quietly. That night, Grace stayed late. As she cleaned the upper hallway, a faint sound caught her ear. The soft, muffled sobs of a child. She followed the sound to Noah's room. A faint light glowed under the door. She knocked. No answer. When she pushed it open, Noah sat huddled in the corner, arms around his knees, eyes swollen. "Noah, why aren't you asleep?" He didn't look up, just pointed toward the closet. Grace followed his gaze and froze. A new lock glinted on the door. "She locked me in," Noah whispered. "I cried, and she said I had to learn to be quiet in the dark." Grace's breath caught. She knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. "No one has the right to scare you like that," she whispered. "You're safe now. I'm here." Noah's small shoulders shook, Slowly, his breathing calmed, his face pressed against her shoulder. Outside, the wind moaned through the willows, like the house itself was sighing. Downstairs, Veronica sat at the desk, writing neatly in her notebook. Day 1. Resistance from subjects. Increase control. Upstairs, Noah finally drifted into sleep in Grace's arms, and for the first time in weeks, no nightmares came. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep in her arms, Grace stayed beside him for a long while. Rain drummed softly against the window, mingling with his steady breathing. She brushed his hair back and whispered, "I'm here, Noah. No one will ever make you afraid again." But deep down, she knew the storm wasn't over. The next morning, the mansion felt unnaturally quiet. As Grace entered the kitchen, she heard Veronica on the phone, her tone clipped and icy. "Yes, something stronger than the last one. No, not for adults, for the children. A teaspoon before bed should be enough. Yes, I'll pay later." Grace froze. The words sliced through her chest like ice. She stepped back, but her elbow brushed a metal spoon, sending it clattering to the floor. Veronica turned sharply. "Did you hear something, Grace?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp and dangerous. I was just looking for a cloth," Grace stammered. Veronica smiled thinly. "Good. I despise curious people." When she walked away, Grace stood trembling, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Something stronger. For the children. The words wouldn't stop echoing. Later that afternoon, Veronica left to run errands. The mansion was still and heavy. Grace began tidying the living room, but when she passed the large sofa, she heard a faint rustle. "Who's there?" she called softly. No reply. Then a quiet sob. Grace knelt, lifting the edge of the fabric. Her breath caught. 3 small bodies huddled beneath the sofa. Ella clutching her broken doll, Lucas shielding his siblings, and Noah trembling like a leaf. "Oh, sweethearts, what are you doing under here?" Lucas looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "She said she's going to give us medicine to make us sleep forever." Ella began to cry. "She said if we keep crying, she'll make us go to sleep like Mommy did." Noah just shook his head, tears streaming silently. Grace's heart broke. She pulled them all close, her arms wrapping around their small, shaking frames. "It's all right. You're safe now. I promise, no one's going to hurt you." She looked around the empty room, her pulse hammering. Shadows seemed to shift along the walls, as if the house itself was holding its breath. This has to stop. That evening, Veronica returned, her face as composed as ever. She reached for the cabinet and took out the small bottle she'd bought. Grace's voice trembled as she spoke. "Miss Dean." Veronica turned, annoyed. "What is it?" "Are you planning to give them that?" "It's just vitamins," she said coolly. "Don't lie. I heard you this morning, the call. You said it was stronger, for the children." The room fell deathly still. Veronica set the bottle down, stepping closer. "You dare accuse me? You're a cleaner, Grace. You don't understand discipline." "No," Grace said softly. "I just understand love." They stood face to face, air thick with tension. Veronica's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You forget who holds the authority here." She reached for the bottle, but the door behind them creaked open. Ethan stood there, eyes dark with confusion. "What's going on?" Veronica spun quickly. "Mr. Wallace, she's accusing me of terrible things. She says I want to harm the children." Ethan's gaze moved between them. "Grace, is that true?" Grace swallowed hard. I heard her on the phone. She was buying sleeping drugs for the children. And when she left, I found them hiding, crying, saying she wanted to make them sleep forever. The silence that followed was unbearable. Veronica laughed, too loud. That's absurd. You'd believe her over me? Ethan didn't answer. He walked calmly to the wall and pressed a button on the control panel, activating the security footage. The screen flickered, then came to life. Veronica's voice filled the room. Yes, something stronger, for the children. A teaspoon is enough. Her face turned ghostly white. That's out of context. Enough, Ethan said quietly. His tone was low, but it cut like steel. Pack your things. Leave my house. Now. For a second, no one moved. Then Veronica grabbed her bag and stormed out, her heels echoing down the hall. When the door slammed shut, Ethan turned to Grace. His voice trembled slightly. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Thank you, Grace. She shook her head. I just did what anyone who loves them would have done. Lucas, Ella, and Noah stood nearby, eyes red but hopeful. They ran to Grace, wrapping their arms around her waist. Ethan watched them. Watched the peace slowly return to the room. And for the first time in months, he let out a long, quiet breath. Outside, the rain had stopped. The golden light of dusk poured through the windows, touching Grace's hair like a soft halo. No one called her a hero that day, but in the hearts of the Wallace children, Grace Miller became exactly that, their silent hero. After Veronica left the mansion, a strange stillness settled over the house. The echo of her sharp heels, the cold commands, the stifled cries. All of it was gone. In their place came the soft murmur of wind through the windows and the gentle rhythm of breathing. Peace, fragile but real. Grace stood in the living room, watching the children gathered on the rug. Lucas was rebuilding his wooden tower. Ella was carefully gluing her doll's broken leg, and Noah leaned against his sister, tired but calmer. A small smile played on his lips. The first real smile in days. Ethan watched quietly from the doorway. He had never seen his home so alive, so human. And he knew, without a word, that it was Grace who had brought it back to life. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ethan invited Grace into his study. The golden lamplight softened the room's usual chill. A cup of tea sat untouched on the table, steam curling into the quiet air. Grace, he began after a long pause. I reviewed all the security footage from the last 2 weeks. I can't believe you endured all that and still stayed for the children. She lowered her gaze. I just did what anyone would have done, Mr. Wallace. No, he said gently. You did more than that. You saved them. The words caught her off guard. Her eyes shimmered, but she said softly, I only wanted them to feel safe. Ethan moved closer, his tone sincere. Grace, I'd like you to stay, not as a cleaner, but as their nanny. You understand them, and they trust you. Grace froze. She had not expected that, though deep down she'd feared this moment, the weight of such a choice. Mr. Wallace, I'm honored, but I can't say yes right away. Why not? I have a daughter, Lily. She's 16. I'm afraid if I spend too much time here, she'll think I've forgotten her. And she hesitated. People like me working for people like you, it always invites judgment. I don't want her to be ashamed of me. Ethan looked at her quietly. No pity in his eyes, only understanding. Grace, I don't care what people say. What matters is that my children can smile again, and that only happened because of you. She bit her lip, thinking. Then, in a calm but firm voice, she said, "I'll stay, if we can make it fair." "I'm listening. I'll work fixed hours, 8 to 6. I need my evenings with Lily. I want weekends off, and I want permission to bring her here sometimes, so she can see that I'm doing something good." Ethan paused, then smiled. A genuine, gentle smile she had never seen before. "Grace, you can have anything you ask for, because what you've given this house is worth more than anything I could ever pay." She blinked, quietly stunned. "You mean?" He nodded slowly. "You've given me something money could never buy. Peace." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind whispered softly outside, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. For the first time in years, the Wallace house didn't feel heavy anymore. Grace smiled, that warm, tender smile that made the whole room seem lighter. "I'll stay. For the children." Ethan's voice was quiet, but his gaze deepened. "And maybe for yourself, too. This house needs you, Grace." As she stepped out into the hallway, the light seemed brighter. From upstairs came Ella's giggle and Noah's quick little footsteps. Grace stopped for a moment, looking up at the photo of Laura on the wall. The woman in the picture seemed to smile back, her eyes soft, as if giving her blessing. That night, Ethan stood by the window, listening to the wind rustling through the willows. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt still. From the children's rooms came soft laughter, the sound of life returning. The peace he thought he'd lost forever had come back, carried by the gentle touch of a woman named Grace Miller. Since the day Ethan officially asked Grace to stay and she accepted, the atmosphere in the Wallace mansion had changed completely. Children's laughter began to return, meals were no longer silent, and every morning the light seemed warmer. Noah, Lucas, and Ella clung to Grace wherever she went, while Ethan had formed a new habit, coming home early just to hear his children talk about their day. But beyond the tall iron gates of the mansion, the world continued to turn in its harsh, unforgiving way, a place where kindness could easily become the subject of gossip. On the second morning of her new job, Grace was preparing breakfast for the children. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting her honey-colored hair with warmth. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. On the screen was one name: Lily. "Mom." Lily's voice trembled on the other end. "Can I come home? I don't want to stay at school anymore." Grace froze, her heart tightening. "What happened, sweetheart?" "They found out what you do. The kids said you're just a maid for rich people. One of them said you're trying to charm your boss to get a better life." Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Grace gripped the counter, fighting the sting in her eyes. "Don't listen to them, baby. I work hard, and there's nothing shameful about that." "But they laughed, Mom. They laughed when I said you're just trying to take care of me." When the call ended, Grace stood still in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of warm bread. Her eyes drifted somewhere far away. Every word Lily had said cut deep into her heart like tiny blades. She had believed this job would give her daughter a better future. But the world was not kind to women who dared to cross its invisible lines. That evening, Grace came home earlier than usual. Their small apartment was quiet, lit only by the orange glow of the setting sun. Lily sat at her desk, eyes swollen from crying. Grace sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her daughter's. "Lily, I'm sorry if my job made things harder for you." "It's not your fault," Lily murmured, voice small. "I just hate how people talk, Mom. They don't know who you are." Grace smiled faintly, though her heart was heavy. People judge what they don't understand. But you know why I'm doing this, right? For me, Lily said, her voice trembling. That's all that matters, Grace whispered, pulling her into an embrace, hiding her own pain in the softness of her daughter's hair. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office downtown, Ethan was facing a storm of his own, a storm named Catherine Wallace, his sister. Ethan, have you lost your mind? Catherine snapped as she barged into his office, a magazine clutched in her hand. Who is that woman? I heard you hired her as a nanny, but everyone's talking about how she's using you. Catherine, not this again. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. Not this again. Do you know what people are saying? A widowed businessman now living under the same roof with his maid? You're destroying your reputation. Ethan turned, his patience thinning. Grace is not just a maid. She saved my children from something terrible. Without her, I would have lost them. Catherine let out a cold laugh. Saved your family? Or replacing it? The words struck hard. Ethan clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. You've gone too far. You're blind, Ethan. Can't you see the way she looks at you? A woman like her, her background, her position, and she dares to walk into the Wallace estate? Don't tell me she doesn't have a motive. If she has one, Ethan said sharply, it's to bring peace to the children you've ignored. Silence hung heavy between them. Catherine's face twisted in anger and disdain. You'll regret this, Ethan. Her world and yours will never mix. Her words lingered like a curse. A few days later, Catherine began her campaign. At social luncheons and charity galas, she spoke with calculated sweetness. Poor Ethan, she'd sigh softly. He's never recovered from Laura's passing, and now there's a woman in his house, a nanny he's very close to. Or, in another setting, she's clever, that one. I heard the children adore her. And Ethan, too, it seems. Rumors spread like wildfire. In business circles, whispers could destroy faster than truth could heal. Ethan soon noticed the change in people's eyes during meetings. Some avoided looking at him directly. Others exchanged knowing smiles. One morning, during a conference with longtime partners, Mr. Robinson, an older associate, leaned back in his chair and said with a half-smirk, I hear you found someone to fill Laura's place. A talented nanny, isn't that right? The room went silent. Ethan looked up, his tone calm but his eyes glacial. I haven't replaced anyone. I'm simply trying to rebuild my family. Oh, of course, Robinson replied smoothly. But you know how people are. They love a romantic story between a boss and his maid. Gossip rarely shows mercy. When the meeting ended, Ethan remained alone in the boardroom. He stared out the window at the city skyline, the glass towers reflecting the sunlight like cold steel. Every whisper, every mocking glance from the past few days wrapped tighter around him. Not because he was ashamed, but because he feared those same words would reach Grace. Across town, Grace knew nothing of the storm forming around her. She still smiled with the children, still read them bedtime stories, still taught them songs and kindness, unaware that behind the mansion's peaceful walls, another kind of storm was gathering. And this time, it wasn't one that came from within the family. It was the world outside, ready to tear apart everything she had just begun to build. The rumors outside still lingered like dying embers, but inside the Wallace mansion, a new warmth had begun to take hold. After the storm of gossip, Grace didn't change who she was. She simply chose silence and let her kindness speak for her. Each morning, the kitchen filled with the clatter of breakfast and the laughter of three small voices. Noah hummed while mixing batter, Ella peeled fruit, and Lucas proudly managed the toaster. From his study, Ethan could hear their laughter, a sound that made his heart soften a little more each day. "Miss Grace," Noah squealed. "I dropped the egg." Grace chuckled and helped him clean up. "That's all right. Everyone drops something once in a while, even grown-ups." "Even Dad?" She looked over her shoulder at Ethan standing in the doorway, smiling. "Even your dad," she said, and they both laughed. Since Grace had become the children's nanny, Ethan felt something shifting inside him. He started lingering at breakfast, listening to their stories. In the evenings, he shut his laptop earlier, drawn by the sound of Grace's voice reading bedtime stories. One night, under the soft silver glow of the moon, Grace sat between the children, reading softly. Once upon a time, there was a young deer afraid to walk through the forest. But one night, a tiny star fell onto its shoulder and said, "Go on. I'll shine for you, no matter how dark it gets." Ella asked, "Did the star stay forever, Miss Grace?" "Yes," she said gently, "because sometimes a little light is all someone needs to find their way home." Ethan watched from the hallway, unmoving. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt haunted by silence. It breathed again, full of laughter, stories, and life. As days passed, he joined them more often. The first time felt awkward, but soon the children's laughter pulled him in. When Noah curled up in his lap one evening, clutching his hand, Ethan realized how much he'd missed this, being a father. "I miss Mom," Noah whispered. "I do too," Ethan said softly. "But you know what? She'd be happy to see us smiling again." Even Miss Grace. Ethan's eyes followed her across the room, folding Ella's blanket with that same gentle patience. "Yes," he said quietly, "especially Miss Grace." Small rituals became their rhythm. Friday night meant baking cookies together. Saturdays were for gardening. Sundays, Lily came to visit. At first, Lily seemed shy, but as Noah taught her chess and Ella gifted her a handmade bracelet, her laughter returned. Ethan noticed the pride in Grace's eyes whenever she looked at her daughter, a pride that shone brighter than any defense against gossip. One golden afternoon, they all played under the willow trees. The children's laughter filled the garden, echoing against the sky. Ethan and Grace watched from the doorway, side by side. "They look happy," Ethan murmured. "Children always heal with love," Grace replied. "When someone listens, their wounds fade." "And adults?" She smiled faintly. "Love and patience, they heal us too. We just forget how to believe in them." Ethan turned toward her. In the fading light, her face was calm, her eyes steady. She looked like that same star she'd spoken of, shining quietly in someone else's darkness. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Ethan found her in the garden, watering lavender under the moonlight. The air was cool, scented with earth and rain. "Miss Grace?" he called softly. She turned, smiling. "You're still awake, Mr. Wallace?" "I just wanted to thank you," he said, stepping closer. "Not just for the children." "For what then?" "For giving this house something I couldn't bring back." His voice deepened. "Life." Grace said nothing for a moment, then lowered her gaze. Sometimes all it takes is a heart willing to listen. Ethan stood there, his chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. In that quiet, he understood. The woman standing before him wasn't just a caretaker. She was the quiet light that had guided him and his children out of grief and back into the world of the living. Late autumn brought its chill to the Wallace estate. The children had been playing in the rain the day before, and by morning, Noah's cough echoed down the hallway, sharp and labored. Grace rushed in. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, just tired," he whispered. Her hand touched his forehead, burning hot. Her heart dropped. "No, you're not fine. You have a fever." Ethan came down the stairs just as she was fetching a cold cloth. One look at her pale face was enough. "What's wrong?" "Noah's temperature is over 104. We need to get him to the hospital now." Within minutes, they were in the car. Ethan drove fast. Grace sat in the back seat, cradling Noah, pressing the damp cloth to his forehead. Each breath the boy took seemed heavier than the last. At the hospital, the diagnosis came. Acute pneumonia. Noah would have to stay. The steady beep of the monitor filled the sterile air. "Is he going to be all right?" Ethan asked, voice tight. "We'll do everything we can," the doctor said. "He needs constant care." When Ethan returned from signing papers, Grace was already seated beside the hospital bed. She hadn't moved since. Her hand rested on Noah's small fingers, eyes fixed on him, as if by sheer will she could keep his heart beating. "You haven't slept," Ethan murmured. "I can't," she said quietly. "If I close my eyes, I'm afraid he'll need me and I won't be here." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. Under the harsh white light, she looked exhausted, and yet she radiated a strange, steadfast strength. Ethan realized no one, not even Laura, had ever loved his children with such simple, unspoken devotion. That night, the hospital was silent except for the rhythmic beep of machines. From his chair, Ethan half dozed and heard her singing softly. The melody was familiar. Laura used to sing it to Noah as a baby, a lullaby about stars and safety. How Grace knew it, he couldn't tell, but her voice soothed the air itself, wrapping the room in warmth. By dawn, Noah stirred. "Miss Grace, I'm here, Noah. How do you feel?" "Better. Don't go." She smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Ethan stood quietly in the doorway, his chest tightening. Watching her stroke his son's hair, he felt something deep, something wordless, gratitude, awe, and something far more dangerous. Affection. By evening, the doctor smiled. "His fever's breaking. He's responding well." Grace exhaled a shaky breath, eyes wet. Ethan could only nod, overwhelmed by relief. That night, he urged her to go home. "You need to rest, Grace." "I'll stay." She shook her head. "When my daughter was sick, I never left her bedside, not for a minute. Noah's the same. I'll stay." He didn't argue. There was a strength in her that silenced protest. Past midnight, Noah began to mumble in his sleep. "Mom, don't go." Grace leaned forward, her hand still on his forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart. Your mom's here too, in your heart." Ethan's throat tightened. Noah didn't call her Miss Grace this time. He'd called her Mom, one simple word. And yet it carried all the love, comfort, and belonging a child could offer. Grace looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was full of meaning, of emotion neither dared to name. By morning, Noah was sitting up, smiling faintly. "Dad, I dreamed Mom and Miss Grace were holding my hands." Ethan smiled, brushing his son's hair. "Then you saw two of the most wonderful women in the world." Grace turned away, blinking fast, but a tear slipped free anyway. As they left the room, sunlight poured through the hospital window, haloing her hair in soft gold. Ethan stopped, watching her, really watching her. She was no longer just the quiet woman who cleaned his house or soothed his children. She was the heart that had kept his family alive, and somehow, his too. She turned, puzzled. "Is something wrong, Mr. Wallace?" He smiled faintly. "No, I just realized something." "What's that?" He took a breath, his voice steady but tender. "That I've fallen in love with you." The air inside the Wallace mansion was thick enough to choke on. The phone still lay on the floor, its screen flashing weakly. Catherine had ended the call, but her words echoed in Ethan's head like cold blades. Grace stood motionless in the corner, her tears still glistening. The children clung to her, their eyes wide with fear. Ethan looked at them, and something inside him shattered. "Grace," he said hoarsely, his voice trembling. She looked up at him, and in her eyes there was not just sadness, but a deep wound filled with disappointment. "You don't need to say anything. Please just let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice shook, but it was steady enough to cut through him. "Do you really think I would betray the trust of your children for a necklace? After everything I've done, you still doubted me." Ethan had no defense. Every word she spoke stabbed at his conscience. He took a hesitant step forward, but Grace stepped back. "I need to leave." The children cried out. "No, Miss Grace, don't go." Ella clutched her hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Grace knelt, gathering all three of them into her arms. "I'm not leaving forever, my loves. I just need some time." Then she turned away and walked out of the house, leaving behind a silence that weighed heavier than words. Ethan stood frozen, guilt clawing at his chest. Catherine's voice still echoed in his mind, that mix of half-truth and manipulation he had allowed himself to believe. He knew he couldn't let it end this way. The next morning, he drove straight to Catherine's mansion. When the door opened, she appeared calm, her usual poise perfectly in place. "Ethan, what a surprise." "We need to talk," he said coldly. She smirked. "If this is about that woman again, then spare me. You know exactly what you've done," Ethan cut in, his voice sharp as glass. "The cameras were disabled, Laura's jewelry went missing, and somehow it appeared in Grace's bag. All just a coincidence, right?" Catherine faltered, her eyes flickering. "Ethan, I was only trying to protect you. She's blinded you." "No, Catherine." He stepped closer, his tone low but firm. "It's you who blinded me. You destroyed the reputation of an innocent woman, a woman who's cared for my children more deeply than anyone since Laura." Catherine's composure began to crack. Her lips trembled. "You don't understand. I was trying to keep what was left of Laura. Don't you see? She's replacing your wife." Ethan's gaze was steady, filled with both pain and disappointment. No one could ever replace Laura, but Grace. She brought life back to this family. Something you never did. Catherine went still. His words broke through the last of her pride. "I recorded our call last night," Ethan continued, his voice low and cold. "If you have any decency left, you'll confess and apologize." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I just wanted to protect you." Ethan sighed, his expression softening but stern. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the woman you've hurt." When Ethan arrived at Grace's small apartment, she was sitting by the window, sewing one of Lily's dresses. Her face was pale and tired, but her eyes were still gentle. The same eyes that had comforted his children so many times before. He knocked softly. "Grace." She looked up but said nothing. "I didn't come to defend myself," he said, his voice rough. "I came to apologize. I let doubt cloud my judgment. I betrayed the trust you gave me, and the trust my children gave me." She met his gaze, not with anger, but with quiet sorrow. "You know, Ethan, trust is the most fragile thing in the world. It can't be asked for with words. It has to be proven with actions." He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Then I'll prove it, no matter how long it takes." At that moment, Lily stepped out from the next room. She looked at Ethan, then at her mother. "Is this Mr. Wallace?" she asked softly. Grace nodded. "Yes, it's him." Ethan smiled faintly and bowed his head. "Hello, Lily." The girl hesitated, then said quietly, "I know you didn't believe my mom, but you came here to say sorry. Maybe that means she's already forgiven you." Grace turned to her daughter, shaking her head gently. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I'm learning how." Lily smiled and wrapped her arms around her mother. "I can see it now, Mom. When you're in that house, they love you for who you are. I'm not jealous anymore." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion. Gratitude, regret, love, all tangled together. He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "Dear Grace, please let me prove what you said. Let me earn back that trust, not just with words." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded softly. "If it's for the children, I'll return. As for me, time will decide." Weeks later, Grace returned to the Wallace home. The air felt different, lighter, warmer. Catherine came by, holding a small bouquet of lilies, and for the first time she bowed her head. "I'm sorry, Grace," she said quietly. "I was wrong." Grace smiled faintly. "No one's perfect. What matters is knowing when to stop before hurting someone else." Ethan stood nearby, silent, watching her. In his eyes was something deeper than gratitude, admiration, and a love that had grown through hardship. That evening, they all sat together on the porch. The setting sun bathed the garden in gold. Noah leaned against Grace's shoulder. Ella and Lucas played chess with Lily, and Ethan watched them, a quiet smile on his lips. The house that had once been filled with silence now rang with laughter. And in that moment, Ethan realized something profound. That some wounds aren't healed by time alone, but by love and forgiveness. Outside, the breeze stirred the willow branches, carrying the warmth of early winter through the open window. Peace, the very thing Ethan once thought he'd lost forever, had finally returned, whole and silent, to his home. Since the day Grace returned, the house on Willow Hill seemed to come fully alive again. There were no longer heavy silences between the laughter. Catherine often visited, bringing pastries for the children and helping Grace plant flowers in the garden. A small gesture, yet to Ethan, it meant healing had truly begun. Ethan spent more time at home now. He no longer brought his laptop to the dinner table, no longer missed the sound of giggles and chatter. In the evenings, when the children were asleep, he often sat on the porch, watching the garden lights twinkle, waiting for Grace to bring him a cup of hot tea. Between them was silence, but a peaceful kind. The kind that existed when all wounds had started to fade and affection began to bloom naturally, without words. One night, under the silver glow of the willow branches, Ethan said softly, "Grace, I owe you more than I can ever say." Grace smiled, the moonlight reflecting in her gentle eyes. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Wallace. I only did what I believed was right." He looked at her for a long moment. "No, you did more than that. You gave me back things I thought I'd lost: trust, family, and my heart." Grace froze. Her heartbeat quickened at his words. "Mr. Wallace." "Ethan," he interrupted, smiling faintly. "Call me Ethan." She shook her head slightly, trying to hide her flustered smile. "Ethan, You're saying something people might misunderstand. Let them misunderstand, he said, voice calm but sure. I've spent too long fearing what people think, trapped in a past I couldn't let go of. But now I know, the only thing scarier than gossip is never daring to love again. Grace lowered her eyes. You know what society will say about someone like me, being close to you. They won't be kind. Grace. Ethan stepped closer, his tone steady and sincere. I don't care what the world says. I only know that when you're here, this house breathes again. The children laugh, and I finally feel alive. She looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't before. Not the gaze of an employer, but of a man who had found what he'd lost. A reason to believe again. Yet even as her heart trembled, her lips whispered resistance. I'm afraid, Ethan. Afraid for my daughter. I don't want Lily to suffer because of me. Ethan fell silent. He understood. It wasn't that she didn't feel the same. It was that she had lived too long being judged. Too used to carrying the weight of others' opinions. The next day, when Grace told Lily about it, the girl sat quietly for a while before looking up with the calm certainty of someone far wiser than her age. Are you afraid of what people will say, Mom? Grace nodded. Yes, you know how cruel people can be. Lily smiled softly and took her mother's hand. But you always told me, as long as we live right, what others say can't change who we are. You deserve to be loved, Mom. Grace froze. Her daughter's words were like a mirror reflecting her deepest fear. She couldn't speak, only hugged Lily tightly. You've grown up, she whispered, and you just reminded me of something I forgot. That afternoon, Catherine came by. She was no longer the sharp, cold woman she once was, but softer, quieter. She stepped inside and placed a basket of hydrangeas on the table. Grace, I just finished my 10th therapy session. The doctor says I need to learn how to let go. Grace smiled gently. I'm glad you're trying. Catherine nodded, eyes glistening. I want to apologize again, not just for what I did, but for the pride that blinded me. I was afraid of losing my brother, but now I see, maybe you're the one who actually helped me keep him. Ethan, standing nearby, watched his sister silently. In that moment, all resentment melted away. He stepped forward and hugged her. We all need forgiveness, don't we? Catherine nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, we do. When she left, Ethan turned to Grace. See, even the deepest wounds can heal. Grace replied softly, but only if we have the courage to admit them. That evening, the children gathered in the living room. Noah brought blankets, Ella carried cookies, and Lucas made tea for Grace. Lily was there too, laughing with them like she'd always been part of the family. Miss Grace? Noah asked, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Do you like our dad? The room fell silent. Ethan nearly choked on his tea while Grace's face turned red. Noah, what kind of question is that? Because Dad looks at you the way our dog looks at a steak, Ella blurted, and the room burst into laughter. Ethan rubbed his neck awkwardly, while Grace tried to hide her laughter behind her hand. But Lucas, more serious, said quietly, If you like our dad, you should marry him. I think Mom in heaven would want that. The laughter faded. The soft light from the lamp cast a warm glow on the boy's small face, making his words sound pure and sincere. Grace felt her throat tighten, tears stinging her eyes. She turned toward Ethan. He said nothing, only smiled, a gentle, hopeful smile. Then all three children chimed in. Will you marry our dad? The innocent question floated through the air like a breeze, yet it made the whole room tremble. Grace looked at the children, then at the man before her. Her smile stayed, but her heart raced. The same flutter she'd felt the first time he took her hand in the hospital corridor. She didn't answer, but her eyes, warm, teary, and full of emotion, said everything. And in that moment, Ethan understood that sometimes love doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes just a glance, a breath, a smile is enough to know that the heart has already opened, ready to embrace what both had been waiting for all along. After that night, the children's innocent questions still echoed in Grace's mind. Will you marry our dad? Such a simple question, yet it made her heart tremble for days. Ethan never mentioned it again, never pushed. He simply gave her time to find her own answer. In the days that followed, the house on Willow Hill overflowed with laughter. Every morning, Ethan drove the children to school. In the afternoons, they cooked together, read stories, and competed to tell the funniest jokes in the living room. Lily blended in completely, becoming an older sister to the three kids. Watching them together, Grace realized that happiness had been there all along. She had only needed the courage to reach for it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the willow trees, Ethan found Grace watering flowers in the garden. He stood silently for a moment before saying softly, "Grace, I never got to ask what the children asked for me that night." She paused, turning around. A shy, gentle smile curved her lips. "And if you were to ask now," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan stepped closer, his tone quiet but certain. "Would your answer be any different?" Grace looked into his eyes, clear, warm, holding no promises of grandeur, only sincerity and peace. Her eyes glistened with tears as she whispered, "Ethan, I don't know what the future holds, but if you promise to walk with me through everything, even the hardest parts, then my answer is yes." Ethan took her hand, squeezing gently. "I promise. Not just to walk with you, but to stay. Always." A month later, a small wedding took place in the garden of the Wallace home. The same garden that had once witnessed tears, now filled with laughter. Grace didn't want anything extravagant. She only wished for a simple ceremony surrounded by those she loved. The sky that day was impossibly blue. A soft breeze swept through the willow branches, carrying the scent of lavender and the chirping of birds. Tables draped in white linen dotted the garden, decorated with small jars of wildflowers handpicked by the children. Lily wore a light blue dress, her hair crowned with tiny white blossoms, her eyes glowing with pride as she served as her mother's bridesmaid. Noah, Ella, and Lucas grinned from ear to ear, each holding a wooden board that together read, "Welcome, Mom, to our family." The sight drew tears from everyone present. When Grace appeared, time seemed to slow. She wore a simple white gown, her hair loose over her shoulders, her face radiant in the soft sunlight. Ethan, dressed in a gray suit, stood waiting beneath an arch of flowers, his eyes never leaving hers. Catherine sat in the front row, a gentle smile on her face. She held Lily's hand and whispered, "Your mother looks beautiful." Lily smiled proudly, "Because she's happy." As Grace reached him, Ethan extended his hand and asked, "Ready?" She smiled. "I've been ready for a long time. I just needed the courage to admit it." The ceremony unfolded among birdsong and the scent of fresh grass. There was no loud music, only the warm blessings of those who truly cared. The doctor who once treated Noah, the old housekeeper, and the neighbors who had witnessed the family's long journey. When it came time for the vows, Ethan took Grace's hands in his voice deep and full of emotion. Grace, you came into my life like light into darkness. You didn't just save my son. You saved me from a loneliness I thought would last forever. I promise to love you, to honor you, and to build this home with all my heart. Tears glistened in Grace's eyes as she spoke, her voice trembling yet steady. Ethan, I bring no riches, only a heart that's been hurt, but still believes in goodness. I promise to cherish this family, to love your children as my own, and to walk beside you through every season of life. The children stood close, holding hands, their faces glowing with joy. When the officiant finally said, "From this day on, you are a family," the garden erupted in cheers and applause. "Dad!" Noah shouted gleefully. "Aren't you going to kiss her?" Everyone laughed. Ethan bent down and pressed a soft kiss to Grace's forehead. Light, tender, but full of the promise of peace. Lily ran into her mother's arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I told you, Mom, you deserve to be loved." Grace held her tightly. "And so do you, my love. We both do." The golden light of sunset spread across the garden, wrapping everything in warmth. Ethan and Grace stood surrounded by the 4 children, 4 little souls who had once been broken, now whole again. Ethan looked around, his voice low and steady. "Family is where love begins." Grace smiled through her tears, finishing softly, "and never ends." A breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers and laughter through the air, and in that moment, they all understood. What is lost is never truly gone. Because when there is love, every wound can heal, and every ending can become the most beautiful beginning of all.